My father raised a crystal glass and announced that my brother would inherit everything: the company, the accounts, the lake house. He told me I got nothing because Caleb deserved it. He thought he was crowning a king. But he was actually handing his favorite son a sinking ship. He had no clue that within 30 days, I would buy the bank that owned their debt. They wanted me to cry, but I was too busy calculating their foreclosure. My name is Willa Vargas. I was 32 years old when I sat down at the sprawling mahogany table in the dining room of the Vargas estate, fully aware that I was walking into an execution, not a physical one, of course. My father, Leonard Vargas, preferred his violence to be financial and emotional. He liked to dress his cruelty in tailored suits and serve it alongside a prime rib roast that cost more than most families in North Carolina spent on groceries in a month. The air conditioning in the mansion was humming, a low and expensive vibration that kept the humid Charlotte heat at bay. Outside, the crickets were starting their nightly chorus in the manicured gardens, but inside, the silence was sharp enough to slice skin. This was the house I had grown up in, yet I felt like a stranger visiting a museum dedicated to a history I wanted to forget. The walls were adorned with portraits of my father shaking hands with senators, standing on construction sites, and cutting ribbons. There were no pictures of me. There were plenty of my brother, Caleb. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the spot usually reserved for guests of low importance. Across from me sat Caleb and his wife, Brielle. Caleb was 35, wearing a smile that looked like it had been bought at the same dealership as his Porsche. He was leaning back in his chair, swirling a glass of amber whiskey, looking every bit the heir apparent. Brielle was next to him, picking at her salad with the precision of a surgeon. She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the light from the crystal chandelier. I recognized it. It had been charged to the company expense account under client retention gifts 3 months ago. "So, Willa," Brielle said, her voice dripping with a faux sweetness that made my teeth ache. She did not look up from her arugula. "How is your little project going over on the west side? It must be so rewarding to work with the less fortunate." She paused, waiting for me to take the bait. The entire family labored under the delusion that I ran a scrappy, underfunded nonprofit community center. They assumed that because I did not drive a luxury car to Sunday dinners, and because I lived in a modern apartment downtown rather than a sprawling estate, I was struggling. They equated silence with poverty. "It is going well, Brielle," I said, keeping my voice even. "We are making a lot of progress." Caleb snorted into his glass. "Progress. That is cute. Dad, did you hear? Willa is making progress. Maybe one day she will actually make a profit." Leonard Vargas sat at the head of the table. He was a large man, taking up space not just physically but atmospherically. He looked at me with that familiar mix of disappointment and pity. It was the same look he had given me when I was 7 and scraped my knee, and the same look he gave me when I chose to study urban planning instead of business administration. "Leave her alone, Caleb," my father said, though there was no bite in his tone. "Willa has a good heart. Someone has to care about the people who cannot make it in the real world." The insult was wrapped in cotton, but it hit its mark. I took a sip of water. The crystal goblet felt cool against my fingers. I did not correct him. I did not tell him that my little project was actually the Aurora Impact Group, a private equity firm currently managing over $280 million in assets. I did not tell him that I was not handing out soup. I was restructuring municipal debt and revitalizing infrastructure grids. I let them keep their narrative. It made what was coming next easier to swallow. My mother, Patricia, fluttered nervously near the sideboard, signaling the staff to clear the plates. She was a woman who had spent 40 years making herself small so my father could feel big. She caught my eye and offered a weak, apologetic smile before looking away. She knew what tonight was about. We all did. This was the night Leonard Vargas officially retired. This was the night the crown was passed. Detailed legal folders were stacked on the corner of the table next to my father's elbow. He cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding together, and the room went instantly still. Caleb straightened his tie. Brielle stopped picking at her salad. My father placed his heavy hands on the table and looked at Caleb, his eyes shining with a pride he had never once directed at me. "I have built this company from the ground up," he began, his voice booming slightly, practice from years of boardroom speeches. "Vargas Ridge Construction and Logistics is not just a business, it is a legacy. It is the blood in our veins, and a legacy must be protected. It must be led by someone who understands strength." He picked up the first leather-bound folder and slid it across the polished wood toward Caleb. "Effective immediately, I am transferring 100% of the controlling interest in Vargas Ridge to you. Son, this includes the entire fleet of 300 trucks, the 4 distribution warehouses in Raleigh and Charlotte, and the current government contracts." Caleb put a hand on his chest, acting surprised, though I knew he had been salivating for this moment since he learned to walk. "Thank you. Dad, I won't let you down." My father was not finished. He slid a second folder across. "And because a king needs a castle, I am also transferring the deed to the Lakewood estate and the accompanying 40 acres of lakefront property to you and Brielle. Your mother and I will move to the condo in Florida next month. The house is yours." Brielle gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh, Leonard, that is too generous." "You deserve it," my father said, smiling benevolently. "You are the future of this family." The room went quiet again. The air grew heavy, like the pressure drop before a tornado touches down. There were 3 people at the table, but only 2 folders had been moved. My father turned his head slowly toward me. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, transactional pragmatism. "Willa," he said. "Yes, Dad?" "You know I love you," he said, and the word love sounded foreign in his mouth, like he was trying to pronounce a dish he had never ordered. "But we have to be realistic. The business is a wolf's game. It requires a certain toughness, a certain aggression that you simply do not possess. You are a nurturer. You are soft. And that is fine." He gestured vaguely with his hand, as if waving away my entire existence. "I have discussed this with your mother and Caleb. We agreed that burdening you with complex assets would only stress you out. You have your charity work. We do not want to distract you from that." "So," I asked, my voice steady, betraying nothing. "So," he continued, "there is no financial inheritance for you. Willa, the company, the properties, the investments, they need to stay consolidated under Caleb to maintain market strength. You understand, do you not? Dividing the empire would only weaken it." He paused, waiting for me to nod, to submit, to agree that I was indeed too weak to hold power. "However," he added, almost as an afterthought, "you have our love, and you are always welcome to visit the lake house, provided you call Caleb and Brielle first to check their schedule." The silence that followed was total. It was a vacuum. Brielle was looking at me with wide eyes, barely suppressing a smirk. Caleb was watching me closely, waiting for the tears. He wanted the scene. He wanted me to scream, to throw my wine glass, to beg. He wanted the validation that he had won and I had lost. He needed my devastation to complete his victory. My mother was staring at the tablecloth, unable to look at me. I looked at the folder in front of Caleb. I looked at the deed to the house he had just been given. I looked at the keys to the kingdom. Inside my chest, my heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was the calm of a demolition expert who has just set the final charge and is now walking toward the safety line. I pushed my chair back. The sound of wood scraping against the expensive rug was loud in the quiet room. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my dress. I picked up my purse. "Is that it?" Caleb asked, his voice taunting. "No thank you? No congratulations?" I looked at my brother. Really looked at him. I saw the arrogance that masked his incompetence. I saw the greed that had blinded him to the details. I looked at my father, a man who thought he was playing chess, but had not realized the board had been burned to ash months ago. "I wish you the best." "Caleb," I said, "I truly do." I turned to my father. "Enjoy your retirement." "Dad, you have worked hard for this moment." "Willa," my father said, his brow furrowing. He was confused. This was not the script. I was supposed to be the hysteric daughter. Do not be like this. Sit down. Have some dessert. No, thank you, I said. I have a busy morning tomorrow. I turned and walked toward the archway that led to the foyer. My heels clicked rhythmically on the marble floor. You are walking away? Caleb called after me, his voice rising. You are just going to walk away with nothing? I stopped at the threshold. I did not turn around. Good night, everyone. I walked out the heavy front door and into the thick, humid night. The valet was already bringing my car around, a sensible sedan that blended in with traffic. As I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door, shutting out the world of the Vargas estate, I finally allowed myself to smile. It was a cold, sharp smile in the rearview mirror. They thought I was leaving empty-handed. They thought I was the loser of the evening. My father had just handed Caleb the Vargas Ridge Construction and Logistics Company. He had handed him the title, the office, and the prestige. But what my father did not know, what none of them knew, was that the company was technically insolvent. The liabilities outweighed the assets by a margin of 3-1. The operational cash flow had dried up 6 months ago. The distribution warehouses were leveraged to the hilt. They had handed Caleb a ship with a hole in the bottom the size of a school bus. And they had no idea that through a shell company and 3 layers of corporate anonymity, I was the one holding the mortgage on the ship. I was the one holding the debt. I was the one holding the anchor. My father said Caleb deserved it. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the mansion. He was absolutely right. Caleb deserved every single thing that was about to happen to him. As I drove away from the estate, the darkness of the highway seemed to pull the memories out of the upholstery. The resentment I felt tonight was not born in a single dinner service. It was not a sudden weed that had sprung up overnight. It was an ancient, gnarled root system that had been growing beneath the surface of my life for 15 years. I vividly remembered the day I realized that in the Vargas household, merit was a currency that had no value if you were a woman. I was 17 years old. While other girls my age were worrying about prom dates or sneaking cheap vodka into football games, I was obsessed with urban planning. I spent my weekends at the public library, studying zoning laws and municipal infrastructure reports. I saw the city not as a playground, but as a living organism that was sick and needed medicine. I had spent 3 months drafting a proposal for a plot of land my father had owned for a decade. It was a neglected stretch of dirt near the river called East Bank. In my binder, color-coded and meticulously organized, I had laid out a plan for affordable, mixed-use housing. It was sustainable. It was community-focused. The profit margins were slim, around 12%, but the long-term stability and tax incentives were undeniable. I walked into my father's study on a Tuesday evening. The room smelled of cedar and expensive tobacco. He was reviewing invoices, a glass of scotch near his hand. "Dad," I said, clutching my binder against my chest like a shield, "I have an idea for the East Bank lot." He looked up, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. He smiled. But it was not the smile of a businessman looking at a partner. It was the smile of a man watching a dog perform a trick. "Let us see it then. Willa," he said. I laid it out. I spoke for 20 minutes. I showed him the density projections. I showed him the architectural sketches I had drawn by hand, maximizing natural light to reduce electrical costs. I showed him the demographic data indicating a desperate need for housing in that specific price bracket. When I finished, I was breathless. I waited for him to critique the numbers. I waited for him to ask about the zoning variants. Instead, Leonard Vargas chuckled. He closed the binder and pushed it back toward me. "It is very cute." "Willa," he said. The word cute hit me like a physical slap. "You have very nice handwriting, and the drawings are lovely. But the numbers?" "Dad," I pressed, trying to keep my voice steady. "The city will approve this in a heartbeat. It solves a problem for them." He took a sip of his scotch. "Sweetheart, real estate is a brutal game. It is about blood and iron. It is not about saving the world with community gardens. You have a good heart, but you should focus that energy on something more appropriate. Have you thought about what you are wearing to the club dinner next week? You need to find a husband who can appreciate all this passion. I left the study with my binder burning a hole in my arms. I felt foolish. I felt small. I told myself he was right. I told myself I did not understand the real world. 1 week later, I was sitting at the dinner table when Caleb stood up. He was 20 years old then, barely passing his community college courses, spending more time detailing his truck than studying. "I have a vision for the East Bank lot," Caleb announced. My father put down his fork. "I am listening, son." Caleb pulled out a presentation board. My stomach dropped. It was my layout. It was my density projection. It was my architectural structure. But he had erased the words affordable housing and replaced them with luxury riverfront quarters. He had swapped the community garden for a private gym. He had taken the soul of my project, gutted it, and painted it gold. "That is brilliant," my father roared, slamming his hand on the table in delight. "Now that is thinking like a Vargas. High-end, exclusive. That is where the money is." "But," I stammered, my voice trembling, "that is my design. Caleb, that is the same layout I showed Dad last week." Caleb laughed, a sound that lacked any genuine humor. "Don't be crazy. Willa, you wanted to build projects. I am building an empire. It is completely different." My father turned to me, his face hard. "Do not be jealous of your brother. Willa, it is unbecoming. He took initiative. He saw the potential for profit where you only saw charity." Then, right there at the table, Leonard Vargas pulled out his checkbook. He wrote a check for $75,000. He slid it across the table to Caleb. "This is for the initial permits and the marketing team," my father said. $75,000. It was more money than I could comprehend. And he gave it to a boy who had stolen my mind and warped it. "Why?" I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. My father looked at me, and then he looked at Caleb with that shining, unconditional pride. "Because your brother deserves it," he said. "He has the killer instinct." That phrase branded itself onto the inside of my skull. Your brother deserves it. It did not stop there. The theft of the East Bank project was just the beginning of the erasure. 2 years later, I received an acceptance letter from a prestigious university in Boston. It came with a full academic scholarship for their urban planning program. It was my ticket out. It was my chance to be Willa, not just the Vargas girl. I remember bringing the letter to the kitchen, my hands shaking with excitement. My mother was crying at the counter. My father was pacing. "We have bad news," my father said, barely glancing at my acceptance letter. "The market has taken a downturn. Cash flow is tight. We had to lay off some office staff." "I am sorry," I said, confused, "but I got a full ride. It will not cost you a dime." "Your mother is not well," he interrupted. "Her nerves are shot. She needs help around the house, and with the office staff gone, I need someone I can trust to handle the filing and the phones. I cannot pay an outsider right now." "But this is my dream," I said. "Dreams do not keep this family afloat," he snapped. "Loyalty does. Caleb is out there on the job sites learning the business. I need you here, supporting the base. You can go to the state college down the road. You can live here. It makes more sense." I looked at my mother. She dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, looking fragile and helpless. "Please, Willa," she said, "do not leave me alone." So I stayed. I turned down the scholarship. I went to the local college. I lived in my childhood bedroom. By day, I attended classes. By afternoon and evening, I worked as the unpaid secretary for Vargas Ridge. I organized the files. I cleaned up the accounting errors Caleb made. I smoothed over client complaints when Caleb missed deadlines. I watched my father buy Caleb a new truck the same month he told me they could not afford to hire a receptionist. I watched them send Caleb on a research trip to Las Vegas that was clearly a vacation, while I stayed late fixing the payroll software. Every time I asked for a salary, or a role with a title, or just a little bit of credit, the answer was always the same. "You are helping the family. Willa, why do you always make everything about money?" But whenever Caleb asked for cash, for an investment, for a bailout, the checkbook opened. "Your brother deserves it." It was a slow, agonizing education, but it was the most valuable lesson of my life. I learned that there was no justice in the house of Vargas. I learned that waiting for them to recognize my worth was like waiting for a stone to bleed. I stopped asking. I stopped crying. I stopped showing them my real grades. I stopped showing them my real plans. I became a ghost in my own home. I played the part of the dutiful, dull daughter. I let them believe I was simple. I let them believe I was weak. But at night, while they slept, I was building something else. I was reading about private equity. I was studying distressed asset management. I was learning how to sharpen a knife so fine that the victim would not feel the cut until their head slid off their shoulders. I realized that if I wanted a seat at the table, I would not be given one. I would have to buy the table. I would have to buy the building the table stood in. And then, I would have to evict them from it. The night I graduated from college, my father shook my hand and gave me a $50 gift card to a bookstore. "Nice job, kid," he said. "Now, Monday morning, I need you to file those EPA reports Caleb forgot to do." I smiled. I said thank you. But inside, the Willa who wanted to be an urban planner was dead. In her place was something much colder. I took the job at the West Side Community Center, not because I wanted to save the poor, but because it gave me access. It gave me a network that my father was too snobbish to notice. It gave me a cover story. While they laughed at my charity work, I was making contacts with city council members who hated my father's arrogance. I was meeting with bankers who were tired of Caleb's bounced checks. I was not helping the family anymore. I was documenting their decline. Driving down the highway now, 17 years after that first betrayal, I felt a grim satisfaction. My father thought he had broken me when he stole my project and gave it to Caleb. He thought he had clipped my wings when he forced me to stay home. He was wrong. He had simply taught me that in this world, you are either the hammer or the nail. And after a lifetime of being the nail, I had spent the last decade forging myself into a sledgehammer. Caleb deserved it. My father was right about that. Caleb deserved exactly what I was about to do to him. Most people in my life, including the family I had just left, believed that after dinner I would drive my modest sedan back to a cramped apartment in a low-rent district. They imagined me waking up the next morning to unlock the doors of a dusty community center, where I would spend my day begging local businesses for donations to fix a leaking roof. They needed that version of me to exist. It made them feel superior. It made their greed feel like necessary stewardship. I did not drive to a cramped apartment. Instead, I merged onto the interstate and headed straight for the glowing skyline of uptown Charlotte. The city lights reflected off the hood of my car, a river of gold and red that felt like a path home. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the Sovereign Tower, a 48-story glass monolith that dominated the city's financial district. The security guard at the gate did not ask for my ID. He simply nodded and lifted the barrier. "Good evening, Ms. Vargas," he said. "Good evening," I replied. I parked in my reserved spot, right next to the elevator bank. I stepped out, took a deep breath of the filtered garage air, and shed the skin of the dutiful, downtrodden daughter. I swiped a keycard, black, heavy, and unbranded, across the sensor. The elevator whisked me directly to the penthouse floors. The doors opened into a lobby of polished concrete and reclaimed wood. A backlit sign on the wall behind the reception desk read, "Aurora Impact Group." This was not a charity. This was not a nonprofit struggling to keep the lights on. Aurora Impact Group was a private equity and impact investment fund with assets under management totaling over $280 million. We specialized in distressed asset revitalization and municipal infrastructure bonds, to the uneducated eye, or to a family who never bothered to ask deeper questions. Impact Group sounded like social work, and it was. We made a massive impact. We just also made a massive profit. I walked past the empty cubicles of the junior analysts and into the corner office where the lights were still blazing. Malik Rivers was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows. Looking out at the city, He had once helped auction off piece by piece when he was a star analyst on Wall Street. He turned as I entered. Malik was sharp, cynical, and the only person in the world I trusted with my back. He wore a suit that cost more than my brother's car, and unlike Caleb, he had actually earned the money to buy it. "So," Malik said, handing me a glass of sparkling water without asking, "did the king abdicate?" I took the glass and sat down in the leather chair opposite his desk. "It is done. Caleb has the company. He has the house. He has the fleet." "And you?" Malik asked, raising an eyebrow. I leaned back and smiled. "I got their love." Malik snorted. "I hope you can pay the electric bill with that." He tapped a key on his keyboard, and the 3 large monitors on his desk sprang to life. They were filled with spreadsheets, red graphs, and debt maturity schedules. "Let us look at the prize," he said. We were looking at the internal financials of Vargas Ridge Construction and Logistics. The family thought their books were private, kept safe in the locked filing cabinets of my father's study. They did not know that 3 years ago. When I was helping out with the filing, I had digitized their entire system and installed a remote access protocol that mirrored every transaction to a secure server. I had been watching them bleed for years. "It is worse than we thought." "Willa," Malik said, pointing to a column of red numbers. "Since Caleb took over the day-to-day operations 18 months ago, the operational capital has evaporated. Look at this." I leaned in. The screen showed a series of high-interest short-term loans taken out against the company's equipment. "He is leveraging the fleet to pay the payroll," I said, shaking my head. "That is a death spiral." "And here," Malik continued, highlighting a section labeled East Bank Luxury Quarters. "This is the project he stole from you?" "Yes," I said. "It is a money pit," Malik said. "He has poured $4 million into foundational work, but the geological surveys were ignored. The ground is too soft for the materials he ordered. He is 6 months behind schedule, and the bridge loan he took to finance it is due in 30 days. I looked at the numbers. It was an autopsy of incompetence. My father saw a shiny building on a brochure. I saw a company that was technically insolvent. "Where is the debt held?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "That is the beautiful part," Malik said. He pulled up a document from the North Carolina regional bank my father had golfed with for 30 years. "Your father exhausted his line of credit. To keep the East Bank project going, he bundled the company's existing debt, including the mortgage on the Lakewood estate and the warehouse liens, into a new distressed bond package. The bank is terrified of this debt. They want it off their books before the quarter ends." "They are selling the paper?" I asked. Malik grinned. "It hit the secondary market this morning. They are classifying it as toxic. They are asking for 60 cents on the dollar. But nobody is biting because the underlying collateral looks shaky." "Offer them 40 cents, I said instantly. 40? Malik whistled. "That is insulting." "The bank knows the company is collapsing," I said. "They know Leonard is retiring and Caleb is an idiot. They will take 40 cents just to wash their hands of it. Buy it all. Malik, every single note, the construction loans, the equipment leases, and the mortgage on the Lakewood house." Malik began typing rapidly. "If we do this, Aurora becomes the primary creditor. We effectively own them. If they miss a single payment, which, looking at these cash flow projections, they will do in about 3 weeks, we can foreclose." "That is the plan," I said coldly. The office door opened, and a man stepped in. He looked tired, his gray hair slightly disheveled, but his eyes were bright with a vindictive energy. It was Harold Dunn. Harold had been the CFO of Vargas Ridge for 20 years. He was a good man, a careful accountant who had tried to warn my father about Caleb's spending. 6 months ago, Caleb had fired him for being too old-fashioned and replaced him with a 25-year-old friend from his fraternity who knew nothing about finance. I had hired Harold the next day as a consultant for Aurora. "Good evening, Harold," I said. "Willa." Harold nodded. He placed a thick file on the desk. "I have the latest update from the inside. It is verified." "What is he doing, Harold?" I asked. "He is burning the furniture to heat the house," Harold said. his voice thick with disgust. Caleb just ordered a renovation of the executive offices, Italian marble, custom furniture. He charged it to the materials account for the East Bank project. He is commingling funds. That is illegal. Willa, if the IRS looks at this, he is going to prison. But before that happens, the company will be bankrupt. He has stopped paying the subcontractors. The drywall guys walked off the job yesterday. I looked at the file Harold had brought. It was the final nail in the coffin. My brother was not just incompetent, he was criminally negligent, and my father had just handed him total control. Harold, I said, when we execute the buy, I want you to be the one who audits the books for the transition. Harold smiled, a slow, grim expression. It would be my pleasure. Malik finished typing and looked up from his screens. The purchase order is drafted. We are using the shell company, Zenith Holdings, so they won't see the name Aurora immediately. We can close this deal in 48 hours. By Wednesday, we will own the debt of Vargas Ridge Construction. I stood up and walked to the window. Standing beside Malik, we looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, in the dark suburbs, Caleb was probably popping champagne, celebrating his new empire. He was sitting in a house he thought he owned, running a company he thought was powerful. He had no idea that the ground beneath him had already been sold. My father said he wanted a shark to run the business. I said quietly, he got one. He just did not realize the shark was sitting across the dinner table from him. Malik clicked the mouse, sending the offer to the bank. They just handed Caleb the captain's chair, I said, watching the city lights blur in the glass. They put a hat on his head and called him Admiral, but they did it right as the ship entered our waters. And in our waters, I added, turning back to face my team, we do not take prisoners, we take inventory. The Wednesday morning sun was streaming through the glass walls of the Aurora conference room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. But the only thing I was looking at was the progress bar on the secure file transfer protocol on the main screen. We were not robbing a bank with masks and shotguns. We were robbing a family with PDF documents and wire transfers, and it was entirely legal. The target was a specific financial instrument, the mortgage note for the Lakewood estate. My father had always bragged that the house was paid off. For years, it was a symbol of his prudent financial management. But 6 months ago, when the cash flow problems at the company became too severe to hide with creative accounting, Leonard Vargas had done something desperate. He had called his old friend Jim, the senior vice president of commercial lending at the regional bank, and arranged a meeting at the country club. I knew exactly how it had happened because I was reading the loan officer's internal notes, which were included in the due diligence package we had just purchased access to. They had played 18 holes. They had smoked cigars, and somewhere between the 9th green and the clubhouse, my father had asked for a favor. He needed liquidity. He needed a cash injection to cover the payroll that Caleb had squandered on new trucks they did not need. So, Leonard Vargas had leveraged the one thing he had sworn never to touch. He took out a home equity line of credit against the Lakewood mansion for $4.2 million. To the bank, it had seemed safe at the time. Leonard was a pillar of the community, but now, the bank's risk management algorithm was flashing red. They saw the quarterly losses from Vargas Ridge. They saw the stalled East Bank project. They knew the ship was taking on water, and unlike my father, banks do not believe in loyalty. They believe in mitigation. Malik sat at the head of the table, his phone on speaker. He was talking to the asset manager at the bank, a man who sounded sweaty, even over a digital line. We have reviewed the portfolio, Malik said, his voice bored, as if he were ordering a sandwich rather than buying a family's legacy. The collateral is depreciating. The real estate market in that specific zip code is softening, and the operational capacity of the borrower is questionable. Look, the banker's voice crackled. The appraisal on the house alone is $5 million, plus the commercial assets. This is a solid package. If it is so solid, why are you trying to offload it 3 weeks before the quarter closes? Malik countered. We know you need this off your balance sheet. You do not want a non-performing loan dragging down your capital requirements. There was a silence on the other end. Malik had them. "We will offer 40 cents on the dollar for the entire debt bundle," Malik said. 40? The banker sounded choked. "That is robbery. We cannot take less than 60. "Then keep it," Malik said, his finger hovering over the disconnect button. "And when Vargas Ridge files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy next month, you can explain to your shareholders why you are holding worthless paper. You will get 0 cents on the dollar in bankruptcy court, and you will spend 2 years on legal fees fighting for scraps." I watched Malik. He was enjoying this. This was the blood sport of high finance. Another long pause. I could hear the banker shuffling papers, likely calculating his year-end bonus and realizing it was evaporating. 50 cents, the banker tried. 40, Malik said, "and we close today. Wire hits your account by noon. Cash." I held my breath. This was the pivot point. If they said no, we would have to find another way to squeeze Caleb. But banks are predictable creatures. They fear uncertainty more than they fear a loss. A guaranteed loss today is better than a potential catastrophe tomorrow. "Fine," the banker whispered. 40 cents. Send the paperwork." Malik tapped the screen. Done. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. We had just purchased $4.2 million of debt for roughly $1.7 million. But we had not just bought the house debt. As part of the bundle, we had also acquired the commercial loans for the Tennessee expansion. That was another one of Caleb's brilliant ideas. 2 years ago, Caleb decided that Vargas Ridge needed to go interstate. He bought a massive logistics hub near Nashville, convinced he could dominate the shipping lanes. It had been a disaster from day one. The warehouse was too far from the highway. The staffing costs were astronomical, and the facility was currently sitting at 20% capacity. The debt on the Tennessee project was massive, and it was cross-collateralized with the main company operations. I walked over to the large monitor where the finalized loan documents were now downloading. "Open the signature pages," I told Malik. He scrolled down to the bottom of the PD. There they were. The digital ink was black and sharp against the white background. First, the signature of Leonard Vargas, representing the borrower. Second, the signature of Caleb Vargas, representing the co-borrower. But it was the paragraph above the signatures that made my heart race. It was the standard boilerplate language that most arrogant businessmen skim over because they never believe they will actually fail. Personal guarantee. It read, "The undersigned individuals hereby personally guarantee the full repayment of all obligations under this note. In the event of default, the lender shall have the right to pursue all personal assets of the guarantors, without limitation, to satisfy the debt." I traced the signatures with my finger on the screen. "They did not just sign for the company," I said softly. "They signed for everything. If the company cannot pay," Malik explained, leaning back in his chair, "we do not just take the trucks and the warehouses. We can take Leonard's personal investment accounts. We can take Caleb's Porsche. We can take the artwork off the walls." They bypassed the corporate shield of the LLC because the bank required it, and they were too arrogant to say no. They signed their lives away. I said, "And now, I own the pen." I looked at the payment schedule. "When is the next installment due?" I asked. Malik checked the dates. The Tennessee loan has a balloon payment due on the 1st of the month, and the mortgage on the Lakewood estate is due on the 5th. Based on Harold's intel about their cash flow, they have about $12,000 in the operating account. The payment for the mortgage alone is $22,000. "So they default in exactly 30 days, I said. "Technically," Malik corrected, "since we now own the debt, we could call the loan immediately due to the material adverse change clause. We could argue that Caleb's mismanagement is destroying the collateral." "No," I said, "I want to do this by the book. I want them to feel the walls closing in naturally. I want them to scramble. I want them to think they can fix it." I walked back to the window. I pictured my father at the lake house, probably sitting on the deck, looking out at the water, thinking he had successfully secured his legacy. He had no idea that the title to that house was now sitting on a server in the server room 3 floors below me. He had no idea that the friend at the bank had sold him out to a shell company called Zenith Holdings, which was wholly owned by the daughter he had dismissed as weak. I turned back to Malik. "Set a timer," I said. 30 days. We do not make a sound. We do not send a single email. We let the due date arrive. And when the payment bounces, and it will bounce, we file the notice of default the very next second. Malik typed the command into his calendar. The countdown began. It felt like the quiet moment in a hunt before the trap snaps shut. I was not just an investor anymore. I was the executioner. And the condemned men were walking around, eating, sleeping, and laughing, completely unaware that the rope was already around their necks. I looked at the signature of Caleb Vargas one last time. "Your brother deserves it," my father had said. I tapped the screen, closing the file. "Yes, Dad, he certainly does. And in 30 days, I am going to make sure he gets every single penny of what he deserves." The 30-day timer on my phone did not make a sound when it hit 0. It simply flashed a silent notification on my screen. Grace period expired. It was exactly 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Outside the glass walls of the Aurora Impact Group, the city of Charlotte was waking up to a gray, drizzly day. Inside my office, the atmosphere was surgical. Malik was sitting across from me, a single sheet of paper in front of him. It was the notice of default. The courier we had hired confirmed delivery to the Lakewood estate 4 minutes ago. I leaned back in my chair, swiveling slightly to look at the skyline. I imagined the scene playing out 10 miles away. I did not need to be there to see it. I knew the players in this tragedy so well that I could script their lines before they spoke them. I knew exactly how the light would hit the panic in my father's eyes. I knew the specific pitch of my mother's voice when her world began to crack. My phone, sitting face up on the mahogany desk, buzzed. Then it buzzed again. And again. It began to vibrate continuously, a frantic dance against the hard wood. The caller ID flashed a name that used to summon a conditioned response of guilt and obedience in me. Mom. I watched the screen light up and fade. Light up and fade. I did not touch it. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. And then I watched the notification for a new message appear. A text message slid onto the lock screen. "Willa, pick up. Please. Something is wrong. The bank sent a letter. They say they are going to take the house. Dad is shaking. We need you to come over. Please hurry." I read the words with a detachment that would have terrified the version of myself that existed a month ago. Back then, that text would have sent me rushing to my car. Desperate to fix whatever mess Caleb had made, I would have been the frantic daughter trying to soothe the parents who despised her. Now, I just took a sip of my coffee. It was black and bitter, just the way I liked it. I did not reply, not yet. I closed my eyes and let my mind travel to the dining room of the Lakewood estate. I could see it clearly. My father, Leonard, would be standing by the window, the heavy cream-colored paper shaking in his hands. He would be wearing his silk robe, the one he wore when he wanted to feel like a lord of the manor, but the lordship was dissolving in his grip. He was reading the letterhead. It did not say First Regional Bank of Charlotte. It did not have the friendly logo of the golf buddy he had trusted. It said Zenith Holdings, a subsidiary of Aurora Impact Group. I could hear his voice, rough with confusion and the dawning horror of betrayal. "Jim sold the note," he would be saying, his face turning that dangerous shade of purple. "He promised me he would hold it. He swore to me on the 9th hole that he would give us an extension until the Tennessee project came online. He lied to me. He sold my debt to strangers." And then, the name would register, Aurora Impact Group. He would not know who they were. To him, Aurora was just a faceless, soulless corporate entity, a machine designed to eat people like him. He had spent his whole life being the shark, and for the first time, he was realizing he was just a seal in open water. Caleb would be there, of course. He would be pacing the room, his expensive Italian loafers squeaking on the hardwood floors. He would not be reading the legal fine print. He never read the fine print. He would be reacting with the only defense mechanism he had: anger. "This is illegal!" he would be shouting, throwing his hands up. "They cannot just call the loan due. I am the CEO of Vargas Ridge. I have rights. These people are vultures. They are predatory lenders." The irony was thick enough to choke on. Caleb, who had spent the last month spending the company's operating capital on a luxury office renovation while stiffing the drywall contractors, was now crying about fairness. He would be looking for someone to blame. It could not be his fault that the company had zero liquidity. It could not be his fault that he had missed the mortgage payment. It had to be the system. It had to be the vultures. And Brielle, my sister-in-law, she would be sitting at the table, her face pale, her hands clutching her phone. She would not be worried about where they would sleep. She would be worried about the optics. "What does this mean?" "Leonard?" she would ask, her voice trembling. "Does this mean the foreclosure notice goes public? The gala is next week. If people see a sheriff's deputy posting a notice on our gate, I will be the laughingstock of the club. We cannot lose this house. It is my brand." She would be crying now, tears that were purely selfish. She was mourning her social standing before the body of their finances was even cold. And in the middle of this storm would be my mother, Patricia. She was the peacekeeper, the enabler, the one who smoothed over the cracks in the foundation until the house collapsed on top of her. She would be looking at the three of them, her husband, her son, her daughter-in-law, and realizing that none of them had the skills to fix this. Leonard was too old and too proud. Caleb was too incompetent. Brielle was too shallow. She would revert to the survival strategy she had used for 30 years. "Call Willa," she would say. I could hear it so clearly, the desperation in her voice. "Call your sister. She works in charity. She knows how to talk to these people. She deals with hardship. She is good with paperwork. She will know what to do. Maybe she can come over and read the letter. Maybe she can call this Aurora group and explain that we are good people." Caleb would scoff. "Willa? What is she going to do? Bake them a casserole? She works at a community center. Mom, she does not know how to handle high finance. This is a multi-million-dollar asset seizure." "She is your sister," my mother would scream, finally losing her composure. "She is the only one who ever actually fixes anything in this house. Call her." That was the moment that prompted the second text message that now appeared on my phone. "Willa, Dad is having chest pains. Caleb is screaming. We don't understand the legal terms. The letter says we have 48 hours to vacate or pay the full balance of $4.2 million. We don't have that kind of cash liquid right now. Please, you have to help us." I stared at the phone. "You have to help us." For years, that sentence had been my command. "Willa, help your brother with his homework. Willa, help your father with the filing. Willa, help us hide the truth about where the money went." I had given them my time. I had given them my labor. I had given them my East Bank project. I had given them my scholarship. And in return, they had given me a seat at the end of the table and a lecture on how Caleb deserved the kingdom. I picked up the phone. Malik watched me, his pen hovering over the next document. He did not say a word. He knew this was personal. He knew this was the moment I severed the last tendon connecting me to the Vargas name. I opened the messaging app. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could type a paragraph. I could explain that they were suffering the consequences of their own greed. I could tell them that I had warned them about Caleb's incompetence years ago. I could scream at them in uppercase letters about the injustice of the inheritance. But that would show emotion. That would show that I still cared. That would show that I was still the daughter seeking their approval or their apology. I was not that daughter anymore. I was the chairman of the Aurora Impact Group. I was their creditor. And creditors do not send emotional paragraphs. They send instructions. I typed 4 words. They were simple words, cold words. Words that redirected the responsibility exactly where my father had placed it 1 month ago. "Ask your heir." I hit send. The message marked as delivered. Then read. I set the phone back down on the desk, face down. Malik looked at me. "Is it done?" "It is done," I said. The silence in the office was heavy, but it was not the silence of a funeral. It was the silence of a courtroom after the gavel has come down. Back at the Lakewood estate, I knew exactly what was happening. My mother was staring at her phone, reading those 3 words over and over again. She was showing the screen to Leonard. She was showing it to Caleb. They were staring at the phone, confused. They did not understand. They thought I was being petty. They thought I was sulking. They had no idea that I was not refusing to help. I was simply enforcing the new hierarchy. If Caleb was the king, then the king needed to save the castle. But the king was broke, the castle was leveraged, and the peasant girl they had mocked was currently holding the deed. "Malik," I said, standing up and buttoning my blazer. "Prepare the legal team. They are going to ignore the eviction notice. They always do. They think the rules do not apply to people with the last name Vargas. They will try to fight it." Malik agreed. "Let them." I said, "I want them to fight. I want them to exhaust every last ounce of energy they have, and when they realize they have nowhere left to turn, they will come here." "They will come to Aurora?" Malik asked. "Yes," I said. "They will come to beg the new owners for mercy." I walked to the door, and I want to be sitting in the big chair when they walk in. The security monitors in my office offered a high-definition view of the lobby 48 floors below. I stood with my arms crossed, watching the Vargas family enter the Sovereign Tower like a group of displaced aristocrats who had lost their way to the country club. It was 10 o'clock in the morning on Friday. They were right on time for the meeting they believed was with a faceless hedge fund manager. My father, Leonard, walked with a heavy, uneven gait. He was leaning on a cane I had never seen him use before. It was a prop, likely intended to garner sympathy from whoever sat across the negotiation table. Beside him, my mother, Patricia, clutched her handbag with white knuckles, looking up at the soaring glass atrium with a mixture of awe and terror. She looked small. The scale of the building, with its marble floors and vaulted ceilings, seemed to shrink her. And then there was Caleb. My brother was wearing a navy suit that was a shade too bright for a somber business meeting. He was yelling at the receptionist. I could not hear the audio, but I could see his aggressive gestures, the way he slammed his hand on the marble counter. He was demanding respect in a building where he did not even have visitor clearance. Brielle trailed behind him, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, hiding from a paparazzi that did not exist. "They have checked in," Malik said from his desk. "Security is sending them up." I turned away from the monitors and walked to the mirror on the wall. I adjusted the lapel of my charcoal gray suit. It was tailored to perfection, sharp and intimidating. My hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant knot. There was no trace of the frantic, helpful daughter in the reflection. There was only the chairman of Aurora Impact Group. "Let us go," I said. We walked down the corridor to the main conference room. It was a space designed to intimidate. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a vertigo-inducing view of the Charlotte skyline. The 4th wall was a screen. The table was a 20-foot slab of black obsidian. I took my seat at the head of the table. Malik sat to my right. We waited. 3 minutes later, the heavy double doors opened. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who knew exactly what was happening, ushered them in with a polite nod. "Mr. and Mrs. Vargas, Mr. Caleb Vargas," she announced. "The partners are ready for you." My back was to the door. I was looking out at the city. My chair swiveled away from them. I wanted them to see the room first. I wanted them to feel the cold, sterile power of the place. "This is ridiculous." I heard Caleb's voice booming as he stepped inside. "We had to wait 10 minutes in the lobby. Do you know who we are? My father built half this city. We demand to speak to the person in charge, not some mid-level associate." "Please, take a seat," Malik said. His voice was calm, deep, and authoritative. I heard the scraping of chairs. I heard my mother gasp. "Oh my God. Leonard, look at this view," she whispered. "This place must cost a fortune. Who are these people?" "They are vultures." "Mom," Caleb spat. "They are just money guys. We are going to threaten them with a lawsuit. They will panic. and we will get an extension. Watch. I slowly spun my chair around. The movement was smooth and silent. I faced them fully, my hands clasped on the table in front of me. "Hello, family," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens after a car crash, before the screaming starts. My father's jaw went slack. He blinked, rubbing his eyes as if he were seeing a hallucination. My mother froze, her hand halfway to her mouth. Caleb, who had been in the middle of pulling out his chair, stopped dead. "Willa?" my mother breathed. Her voice was high and confused. "What are you doing here?" Caleb let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Oh, thank God. Did Mom call you? Did you come to beg them for us? That is actually smart. Good job. Willa, you can tell them about your little charity work. Maybe they will take pity on us if they see we have a social worker in the family." He looked past me, scanning the room for the real boss. "Where is the owner?" Caleb asked. "We have an appointment with the director of Aurora Impact Group. You should probably wait outside. Willa, the grown-ups need to talk business." I did not move. I did not smile. I just stared at him until his smile faltered. My mother looked around the room again, her eyes finally registering the details. She saw the expensive art on the walls. She saw the deference Malik was showing me. She saw the nameplate on the desk in front of me, which I had placed there specifically for this moment. "Willa Vargas, Chairman and Managing Partner." "Willa?" my mother asked again, her voice trembling. Is this where you work?" "I thought you worked at the community center," my father said, his voice raspy. "In the basement, on the west side." "I do work there," I said. "I sit on the board of directors. I fund their operations. But this?" I gestured to the room, to the glass, to the city below. "This is my day job." Caleb frowned, his face twisting in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "You are a secretary. You are a helper. You don't run a hedge fund. Stop playing dress-up and tell us where the guy in charge is." "Malik," I said softly. "Please introduce us." Malik tapped a key on his laptop. The massive screen on the wall behind me flared to life. It displayed the corporate structure of Aurora Impact Group. At the very top of the pyramid, in bold white letters, was my name. Below it were the assets under management, $280 million. And below that, a new graphic appeared. It was a digital copy of the loan transfer documents for the Lakewood estate and the Tennessee logistics hub. The room went cold. "This is a mistake," Brielle squeaked. "Why is your name on our mortgage?" Malik stood up. He walked over to the screen and pointed to the timeline. "Aurora Impact Group specializes in the acquisition of distressed assets," Malik explained, his voice professional and detached. "We identify companies and properties that are failing due to mismanagement. We buy their debt at a discount, and then we restructure or liquidate." He looked directly at Caleb. 3 days ago, Aurora acquired the full debt portfolio of Vargas Ridge Construction from First Regional Bank. We own the commercial loans, we own the equipment leases, and we own the mortgage on your personal residence. Caleb's face turned a violent shade of red. "You? You bought it? You can't do that. That is insider trading. That is fraud." "It is the free market, Caleb," I said, my voice cutting through his shouting like a razor. "And it is entirely legal. You defaulted on Tuesday. The grace period is over." My father was shaking. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He looked at me not with anger, but with a terrifying realization. He was looking at the daughter he had dismissed as weak, the girl he had told to find a husband because she wasn't built for business. "You," he whispered, "you are the one kicking us out?" "I am the one enforcing the contract you signed," I corrected. "But we are family," my mother cried out. "Willa, how could you? We are your parents. You are supposed to help us. You are supposed to save us." I leaned forward. The movement made them all flinch. "I did help you," I said. "I spent 15 years helping you. I kept your books. I fixed your mistakes. I gave you my designs. And when I asked for a seat at the table, You told me I didn't deserve it. You told me Caleb was the future. I looked at my brother. So here is the future. Caleb, you are sitting in it. My father tried to stand, but his legs were weak. He slumped back down. Willa, he pleaded, his voice cracking. You bought the debt. That means you own it. You can forgive it. You can tear up the paper. We can work this out. I can make you a partner. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. A partner? I asked. In what? A bankrupt company? A house you do not own? I do not want to be your partner. Dad, I am your creditor. You bought our debt, my father repeated, as if saying it aloud would make it make sense. You went out and bought your own family's debt just to hurt us? I stood up slowly. I walked over to the window and looked out at the gray sky. I wanted them to see my back. I wanted them to see that they were no longer the center of my universe. I turned my head slightly, looking at them over my shoulder. You are confused. Leonard, I said. I turned back to face them fully, my eyes locking onto his. I did not buy our family's debt. I do not make emotional investments. I pointed at the screen, at the red numbers that represented the ruin of everything he had built. I saw a toxic asset floating on the open market. It was undervalued. It was risky. It was managed by incompetents who were driving it into the ground. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I bought it because the price was right. It was just business. The fact that it belonged to you? I shrugged. That was just a coincidence. Caleb slammed his fist on the table. You are lying. You planned this. You are trying to steal my company. Your company? I asked. The company you have been looting for 18 months? The company that hasn't paid its drywallers in 6 weeks? I looked at Malik. Show them. Malik changed the slide. Up came the forensic accounting report. It showed the transfers Caleb had made, the personal renovations charged to the business, the consulting fees paid to Brielle's friends. We have audited the books. Caleb, I said, we know about the embezzlement. We know about the tax fraud. Brielle let out a small shriek. Fraud? I looked at her. If we turn this over to the IRS, Caleb goes to federal prison for 5 to 10 years. The room went silent again. The fight drained out of Caleb. He slumped in his chair, looking like a deflated balloon. My mother was sobbing quietly into her hands. My father looked at me. He looked old, defeated. What do you want? Willa? He asked. I sat back down. I steepled my fingers. I want the keys. I said, I want the keys to the company. I want the resignation letters. And I want you out of my house by Sunday. Your house? Caleb whispered. I smiled. Yes, my house. The bank sold it to me on Wednesday. You are trespassing. I checked my watch. You have 48 hours to vacate. After that, the sheriff arrives. And unlike me, he won't be polite. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Malik will handle the paperwork. Do not forget to validate your parking downstairs. It is $40 an hour in this building, and we do not cover expenses for non-employees. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the door open behind me. I did not look back. I did not need to. I could hear the sound of their world shattering, and it sounded exactly like justice. I did not stay out of the room for long, just enough time for the reality of their situation to settle into their bones like a damp chill. I watched them on the security feed in the hallway. My father was staring at the table, his head in his hands. My mother was weeping silently. Caleb was pacing, frantically typing on his phone, likely trying to reach a lawyer who would not take his call once they ran a credit check. When I re-entered the conference room 10 minutes later, I was not alone. I was followed by 2 junior associates carrying thick bound documents. The sound of the heavy files hitting the obsidian table echoed like a gunshot. I sat back down. I did not ask if they were ready. I simply slid the crisp dollar bill across the black surface until it rested directly in front of Caleb. This is the purchase price, I said. Caleb looked at the dollar, then at me. His eyes were bloodshot. Is this a joke? He spat. The company is worth millions. The fleet alone is worth... The fleet is leveraged at 110% of its value, I interrupted. The company is worth negative $3 million. I am being generous by offering you $1. It is a symbolic gesture. It keeps the transaction clean. I opened the document to the first tab. This is a definitive transfer agreement, I explained, my voice devoid of any warmth. It outlines the terms of your surrender. Surrender? Caleb scoffed. We are not surrendering. We are negotiating. There is no negotiation. Caleb, I said, you are drowning. I am the only boat in the water, and I am not throwing you a line unless you sign this. I pointed to the first clause. Condition 1. Caleb Vargas agrees to transfer 100% of his equity in Vargas Ridge Construction and Logistics to Aurora Impact Group immediately. I flipped the page. Condition 2. Leonard Vargas will sign a formal statement of resignation from the honorary board, admitting to gross negligence in his oversight of the company's transition. This statement will be filed publicly with the Securities and Exchange Commission as part of the restructuring. My father looked up, his face gray. Willa, you cannot ask me to do that. It will destroy my reputation. I have spent 40 years building my name. If I admit to negligence, I will be a pariah at the club. I will never consult again. I looked at him. That is the point. Dad, you vouched for Caleb. You put your name next to his. If he goes down, you go down. That is how accountability works. I flipped to the third page. This was the one that I knew would hurt them the most. Not financially, but ideologically. Condition 3. I read, upon acquisition, Aurora Impact Group will immediately restructure the equity cap table. 40% of the company's shares will be transferred to a newly formed employee stock ownership plan, specifically designated for the drivers, the warehouse loaders, and the site managers. Caleb's mouth fell open. You are giving the company to the drivers? To the help? They are not the help. Caleb, I said, they are the people who actually work. They are the ones who kept the trucks running while you were picking out Italian marble for your office. And yes, they are going to own 40% of the company, which means they will have voting rights. They will have a say in who the next CEO is. This is communism, Caleb shouted, slamming his hand on the table. You are insane. I will never sign this. I will take this to court. I will sue you for hostile takeover. I will sue you for conflict of interest. I looked at Malik. He had been waiting for this moment. Malik connected his laptop to the screen again. A new document appeared. It was not a spreadsheet this time. It was a series of emails and wire transfer receipts. Go ahead and sue, Malik said, his voice smooth and dangerous. We would love to go to discovery. In fact, the district attorney might be interested in these. Caleb squinted at the screen. What is that? These are invoices from a shell company called Elite Consult LLC, Malik said. You approved payments totaling $350,000 to this entity over the last 8 months for strategic advisory services. Malik clicked a button. The screen changed to show the incorporation papers of Elite Consult LLC. The registered agent is a fraternity brother of yours named Jason Miller. Malik continued, and the bank account associated with this LLC is located in the Cayman Islands. Interestingly, the withdrawal records show that the money was used to pay off gambling debts at the Bellagio in Las Vegas and to purchase a lease on a McLaren. I leaned forward. That is embezzlement, Caleb. That is grand larceny. That is corporate fraud. Caleb's face lost all its color. He stammered, looking for an excuse. That was a loan. I was going to pay it back. Jason is a legitimate consultant. He is a bartender. Caleb, I said, we hired a private investigator. We have photos of you two celebrating the transfers. I tapped the contract. If you sign the agreement, we handle this internally. We fire you for cause. We strip you of your assets to repay the company. And we sign a non-disclosure agreement. You walk away with nothing, but you stay out of prison. I paused. If you do not sign, I hand this flash drive to the FBI on my way out of the building. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Caleb looked at the door. He looked at his father. Leonard was staring at the floor, unable to meet his son's eyes. He knew. He had to have known, or at least suspected, and he had looked the other way because Caleb deserved it. Then, a voice cut through the silence. It was sharp, annoyed, and came from the person we least expected. "Just sign the paper, Caleb." We all turned. Brielle was inspecting her fingernails, looking bored. She did not look like a woman whose life was falling apart. She looked like a woman who was tired of waiting for the check. "Brielle?" Caleb whispered. "Whose side are you on?" "I am on the side that doesn't go to jail," Brielle said, looking up at him with cold eyes. "And honestly, I am tired of this. I am tired of you pretending you are a tycoon when you are actually broke." She looked at me. "I told them you would find out eventually. Willa, I did not know it was you specifically, but I knew someone would catch him. He is too sloppy." Caleb stared at his wife. You told who?" Brielle shrugged. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a slim vape pen. She took a hit, exhaling a small cloud of minty vapor in my boardroom. "About 3 months ago, I realized the money was drying up," she said casually. "Caleb cut my credit card limit, so I started looking for options. I met a data broker at a party. He said there were hedge funds looking for inside info on distressed construction firms." My heart skipped a beat. Malik and I exchanged a glance. We had purchased the initial lead on Vargas Ridge from a third-party data aggregator. We had paid $50,000 for the tip that the company was unstable. "You sold me out?" Caleb choked. "You sold my company secrets?" "I sold the login to the server," Brielle corrected. "For 50 grand. I needed cash. Caleb, you weren't giving me any. And honestly, I figured if the company went under, I wanted a parachute." She looked at me, a strange sort of respect in her eyes. "I had no idea the buyer was your sister. Though, that is a nice plot twist. I appreciate the irony." Caleb looked like he had been shot. His wife, his trophy, the woman he had paraded around as proof of his success, had been the one to open the back door for the wolves. "Why?" Caleb whispered. "Because you are a loser." "Caleb," Brielle said, her voice dripping with venom, "you are a loser with a rich dad, and now the money is gone. So why should I protect you?" She turned to me. "Willa, if I get him to sign, do I get to keep the 50 grand I made from the data sale? And maybe, I don't know, a finder's fee?" I looked at Brielle. She was shallow, materialistic, and disloyal. She was exactly the kind of person Caleb deserved. "We can discuss your cooperation later." "Brielle," I said neutrally. "Right now, Caleb needs to write his name." Caleb looked around the room. He saw his father, defeated and ashamed. He saw his mother, horrified by the family she had nurtured. He saw his wife, who had sold him for pocket money. And he saw me, the sister he had mocked, holding the pen that could end his life or save it. He realized he had no allies left. The narrative of the golden sun had collapsed. "Give me the pen," he whispered. I slid a heavy, expensive fountain pen across the table. It was the same pen I had used to sign the deed to the Lakewood house. Caleb picked it up. His hand was shaking so badly that the nib scratched the paper. He signed the transfer agreement. Then he signed the resignation letter. Then he signed the admission of guilt. He pushed the papers back to me. "I hate you," he said, his voice breaking. I picked up the contract. I checked the signatures. They were valid. I took the single-dollar bill from the table and flicked it toward him. It fluttered through the air and landed on his lap. "The feeling is not mutual." "Caleb," I said, closing the file, "I do not hate you. That would require me to respect you enough to have an emotion about you. You are just a bad investment that I have finally written off." I stood up. "Leonard, sign your resignation." My father took the pen from Caleb. He did not look at me. He signed his name quickly, a scrawl of shame. I gathered the documents. I handed them to Malik. "File these immediately," I said. Malik nodded and left the room. I looked at the 4 of them, the former dynasty of Vargas Ridge. "You have 24 hours to vacate the Lakewood property," I said. "The locks will be changed at noon tomorrow. If you are still there, you will be removed for trespassing. And Caleb? He looked up, tears streaming down his face. Don't forget your dollar, I said. You earned it. The Meckling County Courthouse steps were cold that morning, covered in a thin layer of dew that made the gray stone look like it was sweating. This was where dreams went to die. It was the place where the mistakes of the past were liquidated to pay for the future. I stood near the back of the crowd, dressed in a trench coat against the chill, with Malik standing silently beside me. We were not there to spectate. We were there to collect. The foreclosure auction was a public event, a requirement of the law. Even though Aurora owned the debt, we had to go through the ritual of offering the property to the market. It was the final procedural hurdle to ensure that the title was clean, stripped of any liens, judgments, or emotional baggage. The auctioneer, a man with a voice like sandpaper, stood at a portable podium. He held a clipboard thick with the failures of the county. He adjusted his glasses and began to read the legal description of the property that had defined my family's status for 3 decades. Item number 402, he announced, his voice echoing off the limestone pillars. The property commonly known as the Lakewood Estate, located at 1204 Lakefront Drive, approximately 8,000 square feet of living space on 40 acres of land. We are opening the bid at $2.5 million. A ripple went through the small crowd of investors. There were house flippers and windbreakers, serious developers in suits, and a few curious neighbors who had come to watch the fall of the House of Vargas. They whispered to each other, calculating margins, estimating renovation costs. But Malik stepped forward before anyone could raise a hand. Aurora Impact Group asserts its credit bid, Malik said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. We bid the full value of the outstanding judgment, $4.2 million. The crowd went silent. A credit bid meant that we, as the lender, were using the debt we were owed as currency. It effectively meant that unless someone was willing to pay more than $4 million in cash right there on the courthouse steps, the house was ours. The auctioneer looked around. He knew the game. He knew that the property, while grand, was not worth overpaying for in a softening market. The vultures lowered their heads. The flippers put their hands in their pockets. No one was going to fight a hedge fund that had clearly come prepared to bury the competition. Going once, the auctioneer droned. I watched a bird land on the head of a stone lion statue near the entrance. It pecked at the stone, indifferent to the fact that a dynasty was ending 10 feet away. Going twice. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of rain and legal stationery. Sold to Aurora Impact Group for the credit bid of $4.2 million. The gavel hit the podium with a sharp wooden crack. That sound was the final punctuation mark on my father's legacy. In that split second, Leonard and Patricia Vargas ceased to be the owners of the Lakewood Estate. Caleb Vargas ceased to be the heir to the manor. The deed, the land, the bricks, and the memories now belonged to a corporate entity controlled by the daughter they had forgotten. Let us go, I said to Malik. We have tenants to inspect. We drove to the estate in silence. The iron gates, which usually stood open to welcome the elite of Charlotte, were closed. Malik punched in the code, a code we had acquired along with the security system protocols during the debt purchase. The gate swung open with a heavy groan. When we pulled up the long, winding driveway, the scene that greeted us was one of chaotic dismantling. A large moving truck was parked crookedly on the lawn, its tires digging ruts into the perfectly manicured grass my father loved so much. Caleb and Brielle were hauling boxes. They looked less like a power couple and more like refugees from a lifestyle they could no longer afford. Brielle was wearing sweatpants, her hair in a messy bun, carrying a stack of designer shoeboxes. Caleb was dragging a leather armchair toward the truck, sweating profusely. My parents were standing on the porch. My father was leaning against a pillar, looking out at the lake as if he were trying to memorize the view. My mother was sitting on a wicker bench, staring at her hands. I stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched under my boots. Caleb stopped dragging the chair. He looked at me, his chest heaving. "Are you happy?" he shouted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You got the house? You got the company? You got everything. Are you happy now?" Willa? I ignored him. I walked past him, up the stairs, and onto the porch. Hello, Dad. Hello, Mom. My father turned slowly. His eyes were hollow. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear. He was not afraid of me. He was afraid of the world. He was a man who had been defined by his possessions, and now that they were gone, he did not know who he was. Is it over? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The auction is complete, I said formally. The title has transferred. Aurora Impact Group is the sole owner of this property. My mother let out a small sob. Where will we go? She cried. We have nowhere to go. Willa, the condo in Florida is in the company's name, isn't it? You took that too. I did. I confirmed. The Florida condo was a corporate asset. It has been seized to recapitalize the business. So we are homeless, my father said, looking at his shoes. After 40 years, homeless. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a blue folder. No, I said, you are not homeless. I held the folder out to him. This is a residential lease agreement, I stated. My father looked at the folder, then at me. A lease? I am offering you a tenancy, I explained. You and Mom can stay in the main house. You will pay rent. The rate is set at fair market value, which is $5,000 a month. Based on your pension and Social Security, you can afford it, though you will have to cut back on the country club memberships and the new cars. My mother stood up, hope flooding back into her face. You are letting us stay? Oh, Willa, thank you. I knew you wouldn't throw us out. She moved to hug me, but I took a step back. The rejection was physical and sharp. She froze. Read the contract. Mom, I said coldly, there are conditions. My father opened the folder. He put on his reading glasses, his hands shaking. He scanned the document. The lease is for 2 occupants only, he read aloud. Leonard and Patricia Vargas. He looked up. What about Caleb? He asked. I turned to look at my brother, who was still standing by the truck, listening. Caleb is not a tenant, I said loud enough for him to hear. Caleb and Brielle have 48 hours to remove their personal belongings and vacate the premises. If they are found on the property after noon on Sunday, they will be prosecuted for trespassing. You cannot separate us, my mother cried. He is your brother. He has nowhere to go. He is a grown man. I said, he has a degree, he has a truck, and he has a very expensive lesson to learn. He can find an apartment, he can get a job, but he cannot live here. I looked at my father. This house has been an incubator for his incompetence for too long. You shielded him from the world, and it made him weak. If you want to stay in this house, you have to stop enabling him. The lease is void if he stays here for more than 3 consecutive nights. Caleb dropped the handle of the armchair. You are a monster, he said. I walked to the edge of the porch and looked down at him. I am the landlord, Caleb, and unlike Dad, I do not subsidize failure. I turned back to my father. There is one more clause you need to be aware of. Look at page 15, section 8, paragraph 3. My father flipped the pages. He squinted at the fine print. The right of repurchase, he read. The tenants shall have the option to repurchase equity in the property, subject to the landlord's sole discretion. He stopped. Maximum 20%? He asked. We can only buy back 20%? Correct, I said. Even if you win the lottery, even if you save every penny for the rest of your life, you will never own more than 20% of this estate again. Aurora Impact Group retains 80% controlling interest in perpetuity. But why? My father asked, his voice trembling with the realization of his permanent loss of power. Why won't you let us earn it back? Because I know you. Leonard, I said, if I let you own this house again, you would mortgage it again. You would leverage it to bail Caleb out of his next disaster. You would bet the roof over your head on his potential because you cannot help yourself. I tapped the folder in his hands. I am keeping 80% to ensure you have a roof over your head when he inevitably comes asking for money again. I am protecting you from your own blind spot. My father stared at me. He realized then that I was not punishing him out of spite. I was managing him. I was treating him like a junior associate who could not be trusted with the company credit card. It was humiliating, and it was necessary. "Do we have a deal?" I asked. My father looked at the moving truck. He looked at the lake. He looked at his wife, who was terrified of leaving the only home she had known for decades. He took a pen from his pocket. "We have a deal," he whispered. He signed the lease. I took the folder back. "Welcome to Lakewood," I said. "Rent is due on the 1st. Do not be late." I walked down the stairs, past my mother who was crying silently, past my father who looked like a ghost. I stopped in front of Caleb and Brielle. Brielle was leaning against the truck, smoking her vape pen again. She looked at me and shrugged. "Nice move with the lease," she said. "Saves us the trouble of putting them in a nursing home later." "Brielle, get in the car," Caleb snapped. I looked at my brother one last time. He looked stripped down. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, panic-stricken reality. "You have 48 hours, I reminded him. "I will survive," Caleb said, trying to summon some dignity. "I will start over. I will build something bigger than this." "I hope you do," I said sincerely, "but do yourself a favor. Caleb, build it with your own money this time." I got back into the car with Malik. As we drove away, I watched in the rearview mirror. My parents were standing on the porch of a house they no longer owned, waving goodbye to the sun they could no longer shelter. The cord had been cut. The house of cards had been glued back together, but the structure had fundamentally changed. Malik glanced at me. "How does it feel?" he asked. "To be the landlord of your childhood?" I looked at the lease agreement sitting on the dashboard. "It feels secure," I said. For the first time in the history of the Vargas family, the assets were safe, the books were balanced, and the people who deserved it, really, truly deserved it, were finally getting exactly what they had earned. The wind coming off the river that morning smelled of wet clay and diesel fuel, a scent that most people would find abrasive. But to me, it smelled like victory. It was exactly 1 year since the auction at the courthouse, and the landscape of my life had changed as drastically as the skyline in front of me was about to. I stood on the temporary wooden stage erected in the center of the East Bank lot. 12 months ago, this land had been a scarred wasteland of half-dug foundations and abandoned luxury materials left behind by my brother's incompetence. It had been a graveyard of ambition. Now, it was a hive of organized chaos. There were surveyors with tripods, heavy machinery idling in the designated zones, and a crowd of 200 people seated in white folding chairs. Above us, a massive banner snapped in the breeze. It did not say East Bank Luxury Quarters. It read, East Bank Commons, a sustainable community initiative by Aurora Impact Group. I smoothed the front of my white hard hat. It felt light on my head, much lighter than the invisible crown my father had tried to force onto Caleb's brow. Beside me, Malik was adjusting the microphone stand. He gave me a subtle nod, his way of telling me that everything was in position. The financing was secured, the permits were stamped, the press was ready. We were launching a $120 million mixed-use development project. It included 300 units of affordable housing, a ground-floor retail plaza for local businesses, and the community green space I had drawn with colored pencils when I was 17. I looked out at the fleet of construction vehicles lined up at the perimeter. They were bright yellow and orange, branded with the logos of various major contractors we had hired. Tucked away in the back line, almost easy to miss, was a smaller dump truck. It carried a modest magnetic decal on its door that read, Mercer Ridge Logistics. That was the new name. Part of the restructuring deal I had forced Caleb to sign involved dissolving the Vargas brand. The name Vargas Ridge was too toxic, too associated with unpaid bills and lawsuits. We had rebranded the salvageable assets, the trucks that still ran, the drivers who stayed, under the name Mercer Ridge. It was a subcontractor now, a small, functional cog in the massive machine I had built. They were lucky to have the contract. I had approved them for the site clearing work only because their bid was the lowest, and because I enjoyed the symmetry of it. My father's former empire was now hauling the dirt for my empire. I stepped up to the podium. The feedback from the microphone whined for a split second before settling into a hum. The crowd quieted down. I saw the mayor in the front row. I saw the bankers who had once laughed at my father's jokes. And in the third row, sitting near the aisle, I saw Leonard Vargas. He looked older. The last year had taken the shine off him. He was wearing a suit that was well pressed but out of fashion, one of the few he had kept after the downsizing. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, looking up at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even defeat. It was a profound, quiet curiosity. He was looking at me like he was trying to solve a puzzle he had been staring at for 30 years but never understood. My mother was not there. She found these events too emotional. But Leonard had come. He had driven himself in his used sedan, parked in the general lot, and walked through the mud to sit in a plastic chair. I cleared my throat. "Welcome, everyone," I said, my voice projecting clear and strong across the site. "Thank you for joining us on this historic day for the West Side." There was polite applause. I waited for it to die down. 15 years ago, I continued, abandoning the prepared speech I had written on the index cards in my hand, I walked into a study not far from here with a heavy binder tucked under my arm. I was 17 years old. I had spent my entire summer researching zoning laws, density protocols, and sunlight variants. I had drawn a set of plans for this exact plot of land. I saw my father stiffen in his chair. He knew this story. He just didn't know I remembered it so vividly. I pitched a vision for a place where teachers, nurses, and first responders could afford to live. I pitched a community hub that prioritized people over profit margins. I showed the financial projections. I showed the long-term stability. I paused, letting the wind carry my words. And I was told that my idea was cute. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. They thought I was being self-deprecating. They didn't know I was quoting a scar. I was told that I had nice handwriting. I said, my voice hardening just a fraction. I was told that real estate was a game of blood and iron, and that I should focus my energy on finding a husband who could appreciate my passion. I was told that I did not have the killer instinct. I looked directly at Leonard. He did not look away. His face was pale, his eyes locked on mine. For a long time, I believed that. I said, I believed that because I cared about the community. I was weak. I believed that because I did not want to build monuments to my own ego. I was not built for business, but I learned something very important in the years since that day. I gripped the sides of the podium. I learned that the most dangerous person in the room is not the one shouting about their legacy. It is the one who understands the value of the ground they are standing on. I swept my hand toward the rendering on the easel beside me. It was a professional, digital version of the plan, but the bones were identical to the hand-drawn sketch I had made as a teenager. The layout of the courtyard, the angle of the solar panels, the flow of the pedestrian walkways, it was all there. This project, East Bank Commons, is not a new idea. I declared, it is a deferred promise. It is the proof that a good idea does not die just because someone refuses to fund it. It just waits for the right executioner. The crowd applauded louder this time. They loved the narrative of perseverance. They didn't know the specifics of the betrayal, but they could feel the weight of the history. I saw my father open the program brochure in his lap. He looked at the architectural rendering printed on the glossy paper. Then he looked up at the stage, and then back down at the paper. I could see the memory working behind his eyes. He recognized it. He was realizing that the cute drawing he had dismissed, the one Caleb had stolen and bastardized into a failed luxury condo, was actually a blueprint for a $100 million asset. He realized that he had been holding a diamond and had thrown it away because he thought it was just a pretty piece of glass. He looked up at me again. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was not an apology. Leonard Vargas did not know how to apologize, but it was an admission. He was acknowledging that I had won. He was acknowledging that the husband he told me to find was never going to be as capable as the woman I had become. I stepped back from the podium. I would like to invite my partner, Malik Rivers, To join me, I said. Malik stepped forward, looking sharp in his hard hat and suit. He handed me a ceremonial shovel. It was silver, with a handle made of polished ash wood. Malik and I have built Aurora Impact Group on a simple principle. I said into the microphone, we do not invest in names, we invest in results. We do not care who your father is. We care about what you can build. This was the final nail. I was publicly declaring the new law of the land, the era of the Vargas dynasty, where blood was the only qualification for leadership, was buried under this dirt. We walked down the stairs of the stage to the patch of bare earth that had been prepared for the ceremony. The cameras clicked furiously. Malik smiled at me. "Ready to dig?" he asked quietly. "Always," I replied. We positioned our shovels. The soil was dark and heavy. "On three," Malik said. 1, 2, 3. I drove the blade of the shovel into the earth. It sank in deep, cutting through the roots and the clay. It felt solid. It felt real. We lifted the dirt and tossed it forward. The flashbulbs popped, blinding white light washing over us. The applause was a roar now. I stood there, holding the shovel, looking at the pile of fresh earth. I thought about the $75,000 check my father had given Caleb. I thought about the years I spent filing papers in a back room. I thought about the nights I spent studying finance while my family slept. It was all fuel. Every insult, every dismissal, every "your brother deserves it," had been the fuel that brought me to this exact spot. I looked back at the crowd one last time. My father was standing up now. He was clapping. His hands were moving slowly, rhythmically. He looked tired, and he looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the myth he had built around himself. He was just a tenant in my house, and I was the architect of his city. I handed the shovel to the foreman. "Let us get to work," I said. Malik and I walked off the field, side by side, leaving the past in the dirt behind us. The trucks roared to life, the engines of Mercer Ridge revving up to serve the vision they had once tried to erase. The ground shook as the excavators began to move, but I did not stumble. I had never been steadier in my life. It was a Tuesday evening when I drove back through the iron gates of the estate. But the property no longer felt like a mausoleum of the Vargas family history. The brass plaque on the stone pillar had been removed months ago. In its place was a sleek, modern sign made of brushed steel and frosted glass. It read, "The Lakewood Leadership Retreat, an Aurora Impact Initiative." I parked my car not in the spot reserved for the daughter, but in the spot marked Chairman. The house itself looked different. It was alive in a way it had never been when we lived there. The windows were open, letting in the cool evening breeze off the lake. I could hear the faint murmur of conversation coming from the main salon. Not the hushed, fearful whispers of a family walking on eggshells around a tyrant, but the energetic, chaotic hum of collaboration. I walked through the front door, the foyer, once dominated by a 6-foot oil painting of my father standing next to a construction crane, had been redecorated. The walls were now a gallery of black and white photographs. They featured the faces of the scholarship recipients, the young entrepreneurs, and the small business owners that Aurora was funding. There was a young woman who had started a vertical farming logistics company. There was a boy from the West Side who had patented a new water filtration system. These were the new faces of Lakewood. They were the people who actually built things. I found my father on the back terrace. He was sitting in the same wicker chair he always favored, but he was not drinking scotch. He was holding a stack of business plans, a red pen in his hand. He looked up when he heard my heels on the stone. "Willa," he said. He took off his reading glasses. "Hello, Leonard," I replied, sitting on the bench opposite him. "How is the tenant committee?" He let out a short, dry breath that might have been a laugh. "They are loud. They are ambitious. They remind me of, well, they remind me of you." He looked down at the papers in his lap. It was a proposal from one of the residents for a logistics startup. "I read this kid's operational plan," my father said, tapping the paper. "It is brilliant, risky, but brilliant. He sees angles I would have missed 20 years ago." He paused, looking out at the dark water of the lake. "You know, Willa," he said softly, "when you came into my office that day with your binder, the day I told you to go find a husband, I remember," I said. I kept my voice neutral. I did not need to act hurt. The wound had healed into a scar that was stronger than the original skin. I did not call it cute because I thought it was childish. My father confessed. He did not look at me. He was confessing to the lake. I called it cute because I was terrified. Terrified of what? I asked. Terrified that a 17-year-old girl understood my business better than I did. He said, terrified that if I let you speak, if I let you actually run with it, everyone would see that you were the sharp one, and I would just be the old man writing the checks. He turned to look at me then. His eyes were watery, stripped of the arrogance that had defined my childhood. I gave it to Caleb because Caleb was safe, he admitted. Caleb was not smarter than me. Caleb needed me. He made me feel necessary. You made me feel obsolete. The confession hung in the air between us. It was the truth I had suspected for years, but hearing it spoken aloud stripped it of its power. He hadn't crushed me because I was inadequate. He had crushed me because I was formidable. I leaned back, crossing my legs. I do not need you to validate me. Dad, I said, I do not need you to tell me I'm smart. I have a $280 million portfolio that tells me that every morning. I gestured to the house behind us. I just need you to stop breaking things and expecting other people to fix them. That is all I ever wanted. He nodded slowly. I know. I am sorry. Willa. I looked at the stack of papers in his hand. I saw an opportunity, not for reconciliation. We were past that. But for utility. My father was a flawed man and a terrible judge of character, but he knew the mechanics of construction. He knew how to grade land. He knew how to pour concrete. That knowledge was an asset, and I hated wasting assets. I have a proposition for you, I said. He perked up slightly. A business deal? A lease amendment, I corrected. I pointed to the business plans in his lap. The residents here need technical mentorship. They have the vision, but they lack the practical experience in supply chain management. You have 40 years of that. I paused. If you agree to hold 3 workshops a week and provide detailed feedback on their operational plans, real feedback, Leonard, not the condescending kind, I will reduce your rent by 50%. My father looked at me. He looked at the papers. For the first time in months, I saw a spark of purpose in his eyes. He wasn't being asked to lead. He was being asked to serve. And strangely, he looked relieved. $2,500 a month, he asked. And you have to eat dinner with the residents once a week, I added. Listen to them. Do not talk about the old days. Listen to the future. He smiled. A genuine, small smile. I can do that, he said. I think I would like that. Good, I said, standing up. I will have legal send over the addendum tomorrow. I walked to the edge of the terrace. How is he? I asked. I did not need to say the name. My father sighed. He is in Nashville. He got a job selling luxury swimming pools. He hates it. He lives in a 2-bedroom apartment complex near the highway. He calls your mother once a week to complain that the world is unfair. Does he ask for money? I asked. Every time. My father said, And I tell him to call his landlord, my father said firmly. I nodded. It was done. The cycle was broken. I walked back through the house, past the laughter of the young entrepreneurs who were building empires on the foundation I had reclaimed. I walked out to my car and drove down the long, winding driveway. As I turned onto the main road, leaving the estate behind me in the rearview mirror, I thought about the phrase that had started this war. Your brother deserves it. My father had meant it as a justification for privilege. He had meant that Caleb, by virtue of being the son, deserved the spoils of war without fighting any of the battles. But as I merged onto the highway, heading back toward the city lights that glittered like diamonds against the velvet sky, I realized the phrase was actually a prophecy. Caleb was living in a mediocre apartment, working a job he felt was beneath him, struggling to pay bills he could no longer ignore. He was living the life of an ordinary man who had refused to be extraordinary. He had not been punished with cruelty. He had simply been stripped of the artificial protection I had provided for years. He deserved the struggle. He deserved the anonymity. He deserved the silence of a phone that no one called for advice. "Your brother deserves it," I whispered to the empty car. And then I corrected it. "He deserves his own debts." I drove into the city, toward the Sovereign Tower. I took the elevator up to the 48th floor and walked into my office. The lights of Charlotte spread out below me, a grid of golden possibilities. I stood at the window, looking at the reflection of the woman in the glass. She was not the girl who had been called cute. She was not the secretary. She was not the victim. I was the author of the story now. I had rewritten the ending, and as I looked down at the world I had created, with the rules I had written, I knew that for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I deserved to be. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey, and I hope Willa's victory gave you the same satisfaction it gave me to write it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from New York, London, Tokyo, or somewhere else entirely? Please leave a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of Willa's final move. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please make sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need a little bit of justice in their day.